there, my name is Scott Taylor, and this is a video kind of log, if you will, about my journey into book writing and how I got started in my current novel that I'm working on, and how I think there's benefits to using YouTube yourselves to better developing your own kind of writing skills and writing sets. Let me give you a little bit of a history, first of all, about what I've done in the past. So, I'm Scott Taylor. I've been a blogger for a while with this this one here. Sorry, Doghouse Dad. I've also been a podcaster for say 15 years. Again, DHB Radio and other little projects here and there. But I've always loved writing. But the thing is, though, I never thought I could write because I'd never had. I had standard grade English when I was at school and such not, but I never had any kind of formal training in how to write and how to put my ideas onto paper and to really flesh them out. And but I've always loved reading. It's always been an escape for me since I was a kid. Getting books, physical books, and reading them for hours on end, late into the night, and having these stories appear in your imagination. I've always loved being able to try and tell stories, hence why things like, Doghouse Dad and DHB Radio and such, it's that kind of need to perform a story, tell a story, and to entertain people. And I've always loved the idea of writing. I like writing blogs, I like writing funny stories, I like just jotting things down. And I've always wanted to write a book, a story. And so this book, I've started working on a new book, a new fiction story, my first time writing a fiction story. And so this vlog is going to cover a little bit of how I got started and how terrifying that has been overall. So this isn't my first time writing a book. I've written a book before, which I released on Amazon Kindle. And but that was more of a kind of real life stories. Let me explain. Many years ago, I used to work as a nightclub bouncer. For about 20 odd years, I spent standing in the cold and telling people they were too drunk to get into bars. And again, still love that idea of telling stories. And so many things happened during that career that were funny, things that were entertaining, and stories that you would tell your friends in bars and, meeting for dinner and stuff. And I decided that I was going to try and jot down these stories because at the time, doorman books or bouncer books were very much leaning towards about how tough they were, how many fights they had, and how manly they were, and I once got stabbed and I once got and okay, that's cool. There's a market for that, but it was saturated by all these tales of these, bar door heroes, and I didn't want that. I wanted to tell the funny stories. I wanted to tell the things that were humorous and some of the things that made me laugh and my friends laugh. So I wrote a book. This was a number of years ago now I wrote this book and released it on Kindle as an ebook format only. You'll see the book title here, Knuckle Dragger, Offbeat Tales from a Life from the Doors. Now, reading that book, but it's still available on Kindle. By all means, go and have a look for this now. Reading it back though now, I cringe somewhat because there are things I did with this book that almost gave me lessons when it came to writing the new book. There were mistakes I made with this book, which I'll cover now as well too. And these are all things I've learned subsequently certainly from YouTube. YouTube's been one of the best resources when it comes to kind of learning or trying to develop my abilities as a writer and to work more on how the flow of a story and the grammar, the language, things I didn't know when I wrote Knuckle Dragger. And when you read Knuckle Dragger now, it does read very much like a first-timer writing a story. It's not terrible by any means, but there are so many things that if I could go back and write it again, I would change so much, just in the way, not the stories themselves, because the stories were all true, but just the use of grammar, the way it was laid out. Because back then, I didn't follow the simple rules when it came to writing. I just thought that you put the story down on paper and you tidied up the words a little bit and you put it out there for the world to see. And it worked. Knuckle Dragger sold really well for a while. I was lucky though, because I had a market there already with the podcast audience and and such like that really helped get the book out there and seen and sold quite well for a while. But also, I cringe now when people say they've read the book, or they're reading the book, or they've just bought the book, because you're like, it's not quite how my writing style is anymore. And I'm pretty sure any writer you speak to will feel the same way, that their early stuff does not reflect the stuff you do at a later date. So, Knuckle Dragger came out, and, you know, it's okay. It's okay, you know, it's there. I'm proud of it. I mean, I've got a physical copy. In fact, let me show you. In fact, just hold a second there while I jump out of my chair and bring this to you. So the book was only ever released in audio format. So audio format? Sorry, no. Was only written in ebook format. Sorry, never released as a hard copy. And my wife, for my birthday one year, had gone away, found the source file that I'd written, sent it away to get published into one physical copy of the book. This is the only physical version of Knuckle Dragger that can be found, and I love it so much. It's kept quite safely away here. Just amazing to have this in my hands, to have this kind of physical medium of a thing you've made in your hands means the world to me. But I'd always wanted to try my hand at like more kind of fiction-based writing. I wanted to tell a story. I had all these great ideas for laying a story out, or seeds of ideas that I thought would be quite funny. And again, I'm a big reader. I love reading lots of books, different genres, everything from horror to fantasy to sci-fi to to thrillers. I love a big mix of stuff. One of the main ones, though, the main inspiration for me as a young man getting older, were the works, in particular, my two favourite authors as a younger man were David Gemmell, who's sadly passed away. Now, David Gemmell's work was the first time I was developing emotional reactions to stories, where I was, like the end of one of his books, up here as well, to a picture of it, The Legend of Deathwalker, was... I tears in my eyes at the end of the story. This character who I'd just really bonded with throughout the story, I had tears in my eyes, and for that to happen through a book really meant a lot to me. And David's work was prolific. He wrote a lot of stuff before his untimely passing, and his work really meant the world to me. Whenever the new book would come out, I would be first in the queue to buy that book and to consume it. And also, in the same respects, Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett was my favourite author. Still is probably one of my favourite authors, if not my favourite author. His work, again, from a young age, I was first introduced to The Colour of Magic when I was a young man. Loved it so much. Such a great book. And then from there, just consume, and went through everything. And again, every time a new book came out, first in the queue, hand up, here we go, I love this. Loved it. Between David Gemmell and Terry Pratchett, they wrote these stories that were very fantasy-based, and with Pratchett especially, there was a lot of humour in there as well too, great humour in there as well too, that was just so intelligent and clever and worked so well. And I always dreamed of being able to do that, like to be able to be that writer who could give people that reaction, to give people that tears in the eyes at the end of a story, or to make them chuckle through a story would be amazing. So I'd always dreamed about writing myself and getting a story from the seed in my head down onto the screen. And I finally taken the plunge even. So for me, probably one of the best resources I had was YouTube. BookTube, I believe a lot of people call it as well too. There are channels galore on YouTube with people who are writers, want to be writers, people who are well published. I'll give you a couple of examples here of people who've inspired me, for example. After watching their content, is people who are passionate about writing, who want to help you, to develop you into creating your writing and making it much better. And this helped me leaps and bounds. In particular, there was certain YouTubers who were describing to you how you should go about the editing process and how you should go about the laying out process, how you should go about taking constructive feedback from your beta readers, for example, and whatnot. And this was a huge, huge help for me. And I finally put pen to paper, or fat fingers to keypad, and wrote down my first draft of the book that I'm currently working on. And so I started this about 5 years ago, this new book. And it's been an absolute labour. It really has. It's been... I've loved doing it. I've loved writing down stuff, and I've loved trying to make a story. But when I finally, from 5 years ago to now, finally getting that story all together, and the story changed repeatedly throughout that 5 years. Like from that first seed of a story I had in my head, that I put down the kind of outline, not even an outline, just like a brief kind of oversight of what I was thinking. From looking back at that now to what I have now as my kind of unmolded mess that I've made. Completely different story, very much the same context, but a different way it unfolds and develops. And that just came through somewhat of the editing process of going through that book and picking out the things that didn't work, putting things in that would work, things that are maybe too stretched out. So I finished off the first draft anyway, and very, very exciting. And then went away from it for a while, stood away from it, set it aside, spent about a month just doing other things and a bit more blog work and stuff, and just ignoring the writing entirely, then came back to it with a fresh kind of pair of eyes to read through it. And I was horrified, absolutely horrified. It was one of the worst things I'd read. It was just, nobody wants to read this. I thought, I've wasted my 5 years making this story. Nobody will ever care what this is, and cast it aside. But then I realised, well, it's maybe not the worst thing in the world. It's maybe not terrible. Let's just have a play with it and see what we can do. So I went through a round of editing. The first edit I went through was to just read through it and take notes. I've got a binder in the house, a binder with highlighters and pens. I can just write down everything that needs changed as I read through that story, and it was a good few sheets of A4 were filled with suggestions of changes to be made for this story. The second step for me then was to, once I had these notes all gathered of this first kind of round of reading through and taking notes, was to make the changes. Went back into my manuscript, and I'll cover later on in further videos what kind of software I've used and what kind of editing process was like. But went in there and made the changes that I'd suggested through my first read through. Then back in again and kind of made it all kind of fit nicely, I thought, or smoothed all together again. And now I'm at the point where I've now got a copy that I think is nearly there, but I've given it out to beta readers to have a look at, people I can trust, first and mostly my wife. Now, some people say you shouldn't allow your partner to be your beta reader because they might be biased towards, supporting you and saying, well, everything's great, don't worry about it, just go ahead and do it, and not really picking up on the points that need to be addressed. Not my wife. She is brutal, but in a good way. Like, she wants this thing to succeed, but she also is not scared to say, well, that's wrong, this is wrong, that doesn't correspond with this, that is too mixed up. She will give me complete feedback, and she has already. She's not quite finished the book yet. She, I believe, is about maybe 2/3, if not more, of the way through the story. She's enjoyed it so far, which is really encouraging to hear, and it's given her a kind of, it's compelled her to keep going to see where it concludes, and that's amazing to hear. And here's where I took advice again from the BookTube community, is that you take that advice back from your beta readers, and bearing in mind some people have wildly different tastes than your other readers. This one here might say, meh, it's got too much exposition, meh. And this one here might say, meh, there's too many big words for my small brain, meh. And then you have to pick what works from each of their criticisms and what works for you, essentially. What you think might be viable and what might not be viable. And I think a lot of what my wife so far has picked out has been pretty viable, and so I need to now make those edits. I'm also going to be passing out to other people. I've got a friend who's an author, Dean Mays. And in fact, here's one of his, several of his novels that I think you should check out. Dean's a fantastic author and one of the few people I think I can trust to give it a really critical viewpoint, because he's a published man. He's, had several novels published now. He knows what he's talking about. He's one of my, and a few other people as well too, who I trust to read it objectively and give me good feedback. And that's currently where I'm at. But I'll end this video by saying, if you are looking to start writing your own story or put your own pen to paper, really dig deep into BookTube on YouTube. It's a fascinating pit of advice and again, like my advice to you right now, you might think, what a lot of poppycock, and others you might watch, you might think are poppycock, but there's some people out there that really connected with me, with my kind of style of writing and my kind of style of telling a story, and their advice has been invaluable. I'll cover in further videos as we continue this series, hopefully, of how I did the editing process, or how I'm still doing the editing process, what software I'm using, how I intend to publish eventually, if I do publish eventually. This story might never see the light of day. It might just be the biggest pile of nonsense, and it might just get put in a drawer and quietly set on fire. But the main thing to remember is, if you're writing, don't worry about the software. Don't worry about the fancy feedback. I wrote most of my first book on an old tablet. This is a Nexus 7, Google Nexus, an old tablet. Most of that was just sat down and spare minutes here and there, tapping the screen and writing my story. And a lot of this book, current book here as well too, has been written, let me dig through my rubbish here. This old broken Chromebook, like this old thing is held together by hockey tape. It's been dropped repeatedly, still going strong though. Great laptop as well too. I love the Acer laptops, but this, just for opening and going, I carry this everywhere. It's been bashed and dropped in bags. I can sit in a cafe, pop it open and just start working on my book. You don't need to worry about what you use to write. Just write and get it all down, and then mold all that silly putty into something that resembles a story at the end of it. And that's where I'm at. My nerves are shot through the whole thing. This point right now, where the beta readers are going through my written work, is the most nerve jangling I think I've had it at all. It's ruining me. it's really, it's stress. But we're going to get through it. I'm going to keep you updated as to how things are going, and we'll talk in future videos about what the next steps are. But listen, thank you for hanging around. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be releasing, I think I'm going to make this more of a series, because I quite enjoy just sitting speaking nonsense to the camera and forgetting to drink my coffee. So I think I'll make a series of these about how the process has gone and what steps I took to write where I've got to so far. And if you can, feel free to check out the Doghouse Dad blog on Facebook. It's just nonsense posts that are on there as well too. And if your humour's a bit, if you don't mind a sweary word or two, feel free and check out the podcast. On that note, I will catch you all later on. Thank you for hanging around for this, 20 minutes of me rambling, and I'll catch you again soon. Cheerio.